to some of you on the West Coast. Ben and I are excited to provide some key insights in what was a difficult and challenging year, probably safe to say the most difficult in probably a lot of our careers in the golf industry. Just a special thanks to Bill Walker and the entire IGA team for putting this on. It's good to connect. Great to see all the familiar names. I didn't get to travel much this year. I'll get into that a little bit later, but I missed all of you. Great to connect and talk golf and kind of wrap up our season and try and take some positives from this season, really. As you'll see from the graphic, Ben and I are going to be starring in the sequel today to the Oscar-nominated film, Silver Linings Playbook. We're going to get a chance to get into what the USGA faced, what Golf Canada faced. We're really looking forward to the breakout session following this. Ben and I typically get to chat a couple times of the year. We surpassed our quota with all of this and preparing and planning. Typically, I give him a shout leading into the Canadian Men's Am. It's the last spot into the U.S. Amateur. If he doesn't answer me, Robbie Zelznick will usually pick up. But at a championship at a USGA 1, Ben's probably flying by after morning setup, or I quickly get to say hi at dinner. So it's been good to catch up with some peers south of the border. Obviously, there were a ton of hurdles and tons of challenges to jump over in 2020. And, the primary goal for all of us, safe to say, health and safety for all involved. And I think as a sport, golf really showcased that it can be safe during a pandemic. So hats off to all of you that, in fact, ran championships this year in a safe manner, no major outbreaks or no major health concerns that I'm aware of. Trying to come up for topics for this session, it was pretty easy. We landed on this one pretty quickly. We talked for over an hour. So we've got lots to unpack. Ben and I will go through our experiences, the protocols, pre-championship, on-site, inside the ropes, some new best practices that I think will lend itself to a different championship moving forward. So before I turn it over to Ben, in terms of Q&A, if there's anything, a burning question, just please put it in the Q&A at the bottom. We'll try to answer some on the fly, but I think we'll save 5 to 10 minutes at the end and hopefully have a chance to really dive into some of the simpler and smaller details in the breakout session. So over to you, Ben, to talk about your season and what's left on the USGA radar.
Thanks, Adam. Again, it's great to be here with everyone. And on behalf of the USGA, again, would like to thank the IAGA Board of Directors and all of you that are joining us today, and certainly Bill Walker for the opportunity to team up with our partner here to the north and share a little insight on what both Golf Canada and the USGA went through this year in regards to conducting our national championships. It's hard to believe, that time has gone by so fast. I hope for everybody that's on the line that you and your families are healthy and safe and doing the best job you possibly can to overcome kind of these uncertain times in our world. Adam mentioned, Silver Linings Playbook. I kept looking at that head slide in preparation for this. And in essence, we are going to walk away with a lot of silver linings from what we accomplished this year. I think we all are, right? Just unprecedented what we were able to push through and still do at a state, local level, national level. But at the end, there really wasn't a playbook. There was zero playbook. I don't know. I'd love to meet any individual that had gone through something like this before. We basically had to throw the playbook out with the bathwater and start from scratch. And the one thing that I've experienced in my time in the golf administration industry is the ability to pivot, call audibles, adjust, be flexible, and figure out new ways to move forward. And that's what's great about the partner that we're working with in all of you, is that we rely on one another as resources to help us get through challenging situations, whether it be a rule situation with a player or a challenging issue that has come up with a host club. So though we like to think that there was a playbook, there wasn't one. But looking back now, there is one. We've gone through it. We have the experience. We know how to do some of these things moving forward. And I will tell you, back in early March, I was sitting in Bandon, Oregon. Let's see, that was March 12th when the NBA made the announcement they were shutting down. And to be honest, folks, I didn't believe it. I thought that they were crazy. And then I will tell you, 5 days later, we canceled our 2 4-ball championships on March 17th. Something that I had never seen in my 15 years with the USGA, canceling championships. And we knew that something was going to continue to get worse, certainly in our country and obviously throughout the world. At that time, we also canceled local qualifying for the men's US Open and final stage qualifying for the women's Open. April 3rd, we postponed the women's Open. April 6th, we postponed the US Open. April 24th, we canceled 2 more of our championships. And then on May 18th, we canceled our remaining championship schedule, with the exception of the US Amateur Championship and the Women's Amateur Championship, which left us with the 4 on the screen. And we're very thankful. A lot of you on the phone contributed to the success that we've had with the first 3 that have been conducted. And we're certainly excited about running the US Women's Open Championship in December at Champions Golf Club out in Houston. All 4 of these championships did look significantly different than they have been for the 100+ years of the top 3 and 75 years of the Women's Open. We'll get into that here a little bit. But one last thing in our timeline that I want to share with you is May 7th. And I'm going to dig into that a little bit deeper here as we go through some of these following slides. And I will tell you a little bit more about it later. But to give you a little preview, on May 7th, received a text message from our friends at Bandon Dunes Golf Resort that included a message from Governor Brown in the state of Oregon that said, no large-scale sporting events in the state of Oregon as of May 7th should be conducted until after September 1st. That sent shockwaves through the building at the USGA. And we'll get into a little bit about what that meant for me and the rest of the U.S. Amateur team that delivered on the championship this year. So, Adam, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Ben. And just before we get into our championships, just to paint a picture of, what transpired for the industry in sports in Canada, it was pretty bleak for a long time. And, similar to the States, the jurisdiction kind of was the responsibility of the provincial government and municipal and local health authorities. And, early on in the season, I'm going to share a timeline as well. But very early on, in April and May, other national sport federations, Tennis Canada, Canada Basketball, Canada Soccer, canceled their major sports events, professional events and amateur events. There were really, on the schedule, there were really 3 events. And I think probably many of you know the NHL had 2 hub cities to run their modified playoffs in Edmonton, in Toronto. The question that keeps getting asked, and Ben asked it the other day, is, why did they land on Canada? And we can look to exchange rates. We can look to maybe the cases, COVID cases were a little bit smaller. But, I think you took away our basketball team down to the States. Our baseball team went down. You just couldn't take away hockey. That's just one sacred thing up here that we just had to keep. We had to run this. So hockey was pretty successful. There was a Canadian Premier League, a soccer event that was held on Prince Edward Island, and the Canadian Basketball League, which is development tour for the NBA, was able to run. And very, very small regional or local events kind of thrived in this respect, but very few major events in Canada took place over the summer. Similar to Ben, just looking at our timelines, when this transpired in March and the pandemic officially began, it was hard to really fathom that we wouldn't be running any competitions. And through April and May, a lot of work with our stakeholders, our partners for the RBC Canadian Open, the CP Women's Open, RBC and CP, and the PGA Tour and LPGA Tour, and our provincial golf associations. We relied heavily on them, and we kind of rallied quickly to see how we were going to make it happen. And then as we got closer to June, you know, the writing was on the wall a little bit. So we made a call initially to focus on our major events, no different than the USGA. In May, we canceled some regional and junior events, and really the strategy, and I'm sure a lot of you dealt with scheduling issues. You know, we run 30 competitions and the provinces run over 200. So we almost have, you know, 250 events across the country, and you can appreciate a short season to run golf. So, you know, we made the decision early that we'd focus on our national championships. We didn't want to postpone or reschedule later in the year to give way for the provincial championships to run their events where people would be more apt to participate. And I'll have some player stats and details to share with you later, which kind of helped us make our decision. So, you know, June is when it really hit home, when because of border restrictions and public health concerns, you know, the 14-day quarantine for the RBC Canadian Open, with a lot of our suppliers and agents and players having to travel across the border and then have a 14-day quarantine. It was really a non-starter. So June, it kind of hit home for us, and shortly after the cancellation of the RBC Canadian Open, we canceled our World Junior Girls. You know, shortly after the IGF and the USGA and RNA canceled the World Amateur Team Championship just to align with our partners with any international events. And then our Canadian Championships were canceled shortly after that. So, you know, I mentioned our work with the provincial associations. A lot of them are probably on the call. They were very successful in running championships. 9 of the 10 provinces, one had restrictions that did not allow them to run championships, but it was a very successful season, and they ran championships under very strict order, and the players really appreciated it. And I think it was great for everyone involved. So I'll speak more to that later. And then Ben, we'll get kind of more into the nuts and bolts and the operations and leading into conducting championships. I'll turn it back to you, Ben.
Very good, Adam. So this is what we're here to talk about, you know, silver linings of 2020. I view them as also aha moments, things we implemented this year because we had to. Now in hindsight, they may stay for the foreseeable future. I think this was a great opportunity for all of us, given what was going on, to take stock of how we're currently operating and how efficient we're running, and reevaluate it, put everything underneath the microscope to make sure that for the future we continue to run quality championships, yet in a very efficient manner, in a very safe manner for all parties that are going to be involved. So we're going to try throughout the rest of the presentation to keep coming to, you know, what did we learn from this? What are we going to do for the future? And hopefully we can share with you all some ideas that not only the USGA, but Golf Canada has, and how they're going to operate moving forward. But folks, let's call a spade a spade. A lot of what you're going to hear today, you guys have already discovered on your own, you're doing on your own. And to be honest, there's a lot to learn from the group that's on the phone today. And that's, again, the great thing about the industry that we work in, is the ability to rely on one another to get better. So I don't know that you're going to hear necessarily anything new, but we're going to share with you some thoughts that we've had going through the process of running our championships this year. So Adam, first and foremost, a wonderful picture there, Abandoned Dunes. For those of you that had the opportunity to watch the U.S. Amateur Championship, spent a lot of time on that golf hole, particularly in the middle of the fog down the stretch when Tyler Strafacci won the championship this year. Beautiful place. As I said earlier on, I was going to come back to May 7th, and that was when we received news from the governor of Oregon that large-scale sporting events can be played in the state of Oregon until after September. Well, that got our attention. And immediately, Robbie Zalznick, who I partner with on the U.S. Amateur Championship, we went to work because we wanted to do everything in our power in order to conduct the U.S. Amateur Championship this year. We knew how much it means to the game, particularly the amateur game, and the ability for us to deliver something that was probably going to be pretty entertaining and powerful to watch amongst everything that was going on in the world was important to us. But in order to do so, we needed to convince the governor's office that we could do it in a safe manner. Over the course of about 2 weeks, Robbie and I put together a 100+ slide deck for the governor's office that outlined every single aspect of how we were going to conduct the U.S. Amateur Championship, which really included two things: focusing on essential and non-essential people, and the implementation of our testing protocol, which we were very fortunate to implement COVID-19 testing for the Amateur Championship this year, which was in the end the primary reason we were able to continue to proceed with the championship, is that we outlined that we were going to be bringing people in from all over the world, yet we had this testing protocol in place and this plan in place. And in the end, it served us very well. But I will tell you, we had to spend a lot of time with local and county and state officials to get this through. I know more about what epidemiologists do than I ever thought possibly imaginable. We had to build advocates in Coos County and in the surrounding areas in order to proceed. And again, I'm probably not telling you folks anything you don't already know about what you had to do in your communities or areas. But we were able to push through and present a plan that showed that the USGA was going to be operating in a phase 1 COVID-19 safety model for the championship. That meant we take our numbers and what we see weekly for the US Amateur Championship drastically down, reducing staff, reducing volunteers, reducing, in the end, players, reducing player guests. And we'll get into a slide a little bit later on that paints a bigger picture there. But we were able to accomplish it, and the Coos County commissioners, along with the Coos County Health and Wellness officials, approved our plan, and we were able to move forward. But I guess I would say the silver lining of all that, as I look back now and say, establishing these, quality relationships with the local and county officials proved huge to us. And for those that may not know, we did have some positive cases that showed up on site, and how we were able to diagnose those, treat those, tend to the players' needs, get them safely into isolation and get them safely home was critical to all this. Because at any single moment, when the whole world is watching, particularly the governor's office, any wrong step we took could have shut down the championship. And that's something that we didn't want for anybody. So we were very thrilled with how this played out. Now, as part of all that, the host club has to be along for the ride. And I will tell you, there was no better partner in Bandon Dunes Golf Resort. They wanted to host the US Amateur more than you could possibly imagine. But it was a reputational risk for them as well to be involved with moving forward with this, particularly if positive cases did arise and things got worse in the area due to us bringing all these folks from outside of the state of Oregon or outside the United States in general. But they stayed with us side by side. They dedicated rooms for isolation. They provided meal services to the players that did test positive. It was truly a home run. And this is not what host clubs and golf courses sign up for. This is just kind of the hand that they were dealt this year, but they were a wonderful partner. And I guess, moving forward, these are conversations that we all still have to have with clubs in determining, who's going to host qualifiers or championships at the AGA level moving forward. You've got to talk about these things because we just don't know what's going to happen in the future. I always laugh when we go to the state of California or other regions that don't have a lot of weather. And they said, oh, it'll be, there's not going to be any rain or anything or thunderstorms, in Southern California. Well, you still have to have the conversation. And I think looking back now, I just think the conversations that we have in our planning moving forward are going to be a lot different. We're going to have to make sure that we've got plenty of contingency in place and we've got the right phone numbers at the right fingertips when it's time to pivot or make adjustments to how we do things moving forward. So much to consider just at the host venue, host club location. And lastly, for us, we had to determine who were we bringing to Wingfoot? Who were we bringing to Woodmont? Who were we bringing to Champions? And in the end, we had to, basically put everything underneath the microscope and determine what was the best possible situation for us to keep everybody healthy and safe. And I will tell you, at Bandon Dunes, we had 2 10th tee shuttles that were going to require players to get in cars for more than 5 minutes to get to certain locations. Very much a problem in the COVID era. If we went to a 1-tee start, we could address that a little bit differently, but with a 1-tee start, we all know you face daylight issues in August, and we had to reduce the field size. But not having qualifying certainly was killer. We wanted to make sure that we had the right players there, and it played out the way that it did. We reduced from 312 players down to 264. Obviously, we didn't have any qualifying for any of our championships this year. Those were tough decisions, impacted all of you, I'm sure, quite a bit. May also have freed you up to be able to do some other things specifically in your region or in your state, given how crazy the times were. In the end, particularly at this U.S. Amateur Championship, we had the strongest U.S. Amateur field in the history of the U.S. Amateur. But we missed the qualifying aspect. We missed the openness of our championships in general, and are looking forward to that coming back in future years. But we had to do things that we have never done before. And those of you that have been around the USGA know that we have a tendency to continue to do the same thing over and over and over. But I will tell you, what has taken place this year has really got us thinking about how to do everything a little bit differently moving forward, including how we operate our championships. So it was a wonderful opportunity for us to look in the mirror and say, okay, now it's time. And I think we did that across the board leading into the championships this year. So moving over to personnel to dig in a little bit, with so much craziness in our world, we had to reevaluate everything when it came to our staff, our officials that came on site and worked, and even media down to volunteers, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. But who is truly essential and who is non-essential? And that's a difficult conversation to have, because everybody is essential. That's why they're members of our staff or member of our volunteer corps, right? Because we want them to be there because they contribute to the overall success of the championship. But this wasn't a time to have additional bodies on site. This wasn't a year to have people in and around areas to be seen. We needed to focus on getting the championship conducted in a safe manner. And that was it. So we all had to go through, I would imagine everybody on the phone did too, had to go through, who's comfortable traveling to Oregon, who's comfortable traveling to Houston or to metropolitan New York. That was truly the hotbed in the United States of where this virus kind of took off. They were tough conversations. We're all dealing with a lot outside of the pressure of work, things with kids in school and so much else going on. But I will tell you, I was amazed, at least speaking from a USGA perspective, of what our staff rallied around to do. We all kind of looked at it as, this is our calling. We need to go make a mark. These are troubling times. Let's prevail. And I didn't have a single person, at least on my staff for the U.S. Amateur, that turned their head and said that they weren't going to come out. And I think a lot of that, folks, goes back to the fact that we had pretty stringent testing protocols and procedures on site. We built bubbles, for a lack of a better term, for our staff and our officials and media to work within to ensure the safe environment. But we really had to get down to the nitty-gritty of who needs to be there and who doesn't need to be there. And that got challenging when you're dealing with, your own supervisor or other high-ranking officials in your organizations that needed to stay behind in this particular circumstance, because we just needed to focus on solely getting the championships conducted. In regards to rules officials, one of the greatest things, particularly about USGA championships, is the involvement of our volunteer rules officials from all over the country. Several of you, I'm sure, here on the line with us today didn't get to see many faces this year. Certainly looked forward to doing so in the future. But we took our existing model and went to a completely different approach, utilizing more regional USGA committee members and officials to serve in a rules capacity at our championship. I will tell you, we shrunk the rules committee size at the US Amateur in half. And I will tell you, a silver lining from that is, honestly, I think we were more effective, and our volunteers that were on site this year had a better experience. Their days may have been a little bit longer, but they probably made a few more rulings. They probably felt like they contributed more to the success of the championship than ever before. And several of them have reached out to me since and said, hey, this was a lot of fun. I really felt like I was a part of this experience. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of something that many others probably won't ever get to do again. So we look at our rules officials numbers and say, hey, are we missing something here? It is so nice to have a lot of people and good to make sure that you've got all areas of what you need covered. But at the same time, bigger is not necessarily better. And you're probably going to hear me say that again. We're starting to realize that maybe we can provide a higher level experience with less. So I don't know how that plays into what what you folks are doing at your levels, but just something to think about there. And obviously, with social media and digital content and what we can do simply through technology as we're experiencing today, the ability to allow members of the media and folks to work from afar and do things at a slightly different way is something that it's just happening. Whether COVID was happening or not, it was just happening, and it gave us an excuse to push that moving forward to kind of scale back on site, but raise levels and expectations by doing things more remotely from afar.
There's not a question yet, Ben, but I can foresee a question on if all of us get a rain check on our USGA invites for next year when we can get back to the US. So start thinking about that question and how you're going to answer that one.
You got it.
As we move through all the pre-championship elements and staffing, obviously to run a championship, you need your players. And, looking back at our timeline, April, May, we were trying to figure out when do we reach out to the players, from a timing perspective, how much time do we need to give them to prepare, with the situation being so fluid and the uncertainty of the season looming so early. We waited till early May to reach out to our players, and we sent out a survey to 14,000 players, anyone that competed in our championship in the last 2 years, as well as the provincial associations. And, loud and clear, I think probably like many of the players wanted to compete. They were even a couple months into this pandemic, they were excited and ready to get back out and play. Across Canada, golf courses were able to open in early May. So people were playing pretty early in the season up in Canada, at least. And, I've got some pretty impressive stats, and it kind of changed our thinking, how we were looking at provincial championships versus national championships. 81% of the players said they would compete in a provincial championship, whereas 67 players said they would compete in a national championship. So along with our provincial partners, that kind of changed our thought process, and especially for some of the provinces, just to know that they could probably run their championship if players were driving or it was closer proximity to get to the course. So some really interesting stats. But at the end of the day, we asked them what would they be in favor for with some of these new safe protocols. The top three, the digital documents, and we'll talk more about communication and the transformation that came from this year. They were okay. Number 2 on the list was no social functions. I think we're all accustomed to the dinners, the player receptions, the award ceremonies, the cut parties. Players just wanted to compete. At the end of the day, they just wanted to play for your provincial or national championship. And then the third one was no spectators. So many of your events probably don't have a lot of spectators, and then a lot of associations had to make that tough decision on how many family members, how many friends are you going to allow caddies. But that was pretty much the top three in favor. And then the biggest things that they were opposed to would be limited practice facilities. Modified rules would be another one. And then in terms of carts, motorized or push carts, that was kind of the third on their list. So those were their top three. Those were things that organizations really couldn't steer too far away from to make sure that they were still providing that opportunity for players. So, you know, I think managing the expectations and communication was probably paramount. What I heard the most from talking to a bunch of tours and a bunch of other organizations across Canada, the Canadian Junior Golf Association, the Maple Leaf Junior Tour, a lot of other associations, they just wanted to make sure that the communication was out there. Here are the rules, you know, here's when you get to arrive, you know, play some golf, and then you're probably going to have to leave afterwards. So I think all in all, players were excited and lucky to compete in a lot of championships this year.
Adam, I think that's fabulous, and what you guys have done to seek feedback from, you know, your primary stakeholders there. I think it's so critical to what we do moving forward. That's why we run these great championships, right? Is to crown champions and give people a place to go and compete. And I think we would probably all agree, and for the most part, that, you know, golf has done very well through all of this, given that it's an outdoor sport and you can maintain, you know, proper social distancing as you play the game. And, you know, from the conversations that I've had with folks in the industry and at the club level, that, you know, rounds are extremely up and more people are playing golf than we ever possibly could imagine through all this. So it's great to hear that, you know, the players just want to get in the car and go, and it's a good opportunity for that to maybe escape for a little bit what's going on in the world, but do so in a safe manner. I will tell you, players is a primary focus of ours, and through this, we had to reimagine it as well. You know, from every little detail, and you can see, you know, the red boxes across the screen here, you know, these are the kind of the things that we focused on. And I'm going to touch on that middle one first. Player services, and those of you that know Robbie Zalesnik on our staff, this is something that he really exceeds and does at a very high level, and that's be in a position to service players that compete in all of our championships as best as we can. This was a unique year. We did something that we never did before. It was easy to just send players information on how to get to Bandon Dunes or Wingfoot or wherever it may be. Here's what you need to fill out. See you when you get there. That certainly wasn't the case this year. I will tell you, both between the U.S. Amateur, the Women's Amateur, and the U.S. Open, and I'm under the assumption that our Women's Open team is operating this way as well. Every single player is getting a phone call from a USGA staff member to walk them through the details of getting to the championships that they played in this year, mainly because of the testing protocol, folks, and the implications of what could happen if you stayed with another individual that tested positive, how many guests you could bring, all those types of things. Those conversations weren't 15 minutes. They were generally, you know, somewhere between 2 and 3 hours each that were spent on players to get them comfortable with the situation. A lot of time on the phone with players' parents, and so forth. But having that direct one-on-one level of customer service made a tremendous difference in the players' experience overall and their comfort levels with playing in our championships, regardless of whether we had testing or not. So, you know, hats off certainly to our team that was able to kind of pull that off. And I will tell you, you know, some of those conversations were 3 hours, some of those conversations were multiple days. But the relationships that you can build with your players through conversations and seeking feedback and asking for input on certain things from them certainly has made a tremendous difference with how we've done things, and we will do things in the future. How we went about the one-on-one conversations this year is probably something that we'll look to continue. We're looking to secure long-lasting relationships with players that compete in our events, and this is one way to do it, to get them to know them more on a personal level so that they can attach a name to a face moving forward. But we had to work through things like travel and accommodations. Bandon Dunes is certainly not easy to get to. What happens if Adam Helmer and I decide to share a room and Adam tests positive? Do I go down with the ship? The answer to that in August was yes. Well, that means I need to have my own room. Well, probably. Well, there are enough rooms in Bandon, Oregon? Not really. So you start to think of the questions that a player may have that we need to be able to answer and cater to in order to make sure that the player has a quality experience. It was quite challenging. So I think, again, for us, hindsight being 2020, we look at it now, those conversations are critical, and the one-on-one connection with players are important. And that is something that we will look to continue to do, and will probably become a best practice of ours moving forward, is assembling teams to up our level of customer service with players. Now, I get it. Not every association or organization has the ability to do that, but there may be other ways that we could get creative and think of that would allow us to raise level of customer service to players moving forward. We had to address with them on-site needs. Gyms and fitness areas were closed. We weren't providing other things that we normally do at our championship. Our players' dinners and rules committee functions were all being canceled. At the end of the day, the players, like Adam said, just wanted to compete for a national championship. We just needed to give them the stage to do it and give it in a safe manner. And walking away from that, we realized, okay, what's truly important? Is it the knives and forks, as we like to call it internally? Or is it making sure that you got a quality golf course that's set up properly, the players understand what they're playing for, those types of things. So in the end, I think we're going to try and listen more than we ever have to what the players' needs are.
Yeah, great insight on player feedback and keeping them close to what you're doing, Ben. Practice, I think from two perspectives. I won't spend too much time on this one, but as I mentioned, as you plan and prepare for your season, and scheduling was very challenging. So people were moving championships later in the season. From a scheduling standpoint, the feedback from the player survey was that they at least want 2 to 3 weeks to be able to practice for a championship before getting on site. So that was really interesting and good to gauge, okay, what's our last chance we can run a championship within a small window. And then on site, I think it's pretty easy from a COVID and safety perspective, practice, limiting the time, the availability of the practice facilities, the cleaning, the sanitation. Obviously this one, from a silver lining perspective, I think, the players appreciated that they were able to practice still, not as much as they were used to. But I think silver lining is probably for the host organization, the host club, as you try and secure golf clubs, and with participation rates being so high in Canada and the United States, just to be able to give a golf course back, depending on the scale of your championship, and limit the practice to before the round for 30 minutes to 45 minutes was kind of the standard for associations across Canada. But it just allowed for clubs to have member play or public play after the fact, and you can open up the practice facilities to other people other than your competitors during the event. So I don't know, in the breakout, maybe a good one is, suspension of play. If you, how long do you open up the practice facilities, if at all, again, depending on the facility. So I think this one's pretty straightforward. Silver lining is with the host organization and the host club.
Adam, that is truly fascinating. I'm hopeful we can dive into that a little bit, maybe at the further breakout session, just the controlled practice and the time to practice. That was fascinating, and I know a lot of folks did that, and I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about it, maybe at a later date. So thanks for sharing those words. Again, we see in front of us, essential versus non-essential. nobody really wants to be known as non-essential in anything that we're doing. But 2020 certainly wasn't the year to make a big stink about that. We had to focus on what was truly needed in order to get championships conducted. And I think we all miss spectators really hard. Certainly this week, I grew up 20 minutes from the gates at Augusta, Georgia. Spent a lot of my youth at the Masters, and the goosebumps still to this day that I get, even watching it on television, the roars that you hear from Amen Corner and other areas of that golf course. Spectator involvement is huge. It's a number one way that we can continue to grow the game, bringing people of all ages to see it up close and personal. And we hope in the years ahead that we'll have the ability to bring them back on the ground, certainly at our championships moving forward. But this wasn't the year for it. With so much unknown, we couldn't take the risk. In order, we'd much rather have players playing than spectators potentially bringing down the opportunity or the whole championship. So we really had to put all stakeholders, if you will, underneath the microscope and try and make a determination of who needed to be on site and who didn't. And it was really the close player guests that we viewed as essential, particularly to the U.S. Amateur Championship and as well as the Women's Am and the U.S. Open, where players were allowed only a certain number of player guests to travel with them this year, because those people that traveled with them that were also subject to the testing protocol. And when you start to do the math, the amount of people that were tested for our championships and certainly those on all tour levels is pretty astronomical. And is that something that can be sustained in the years ahead? I'm not the right person to answer that, but we certainly had to draw a line in the sand to make sure that the player felt comfortable and had who they needed there, but nothing more than that. And it required us to make some tough decisions across the board. And I think maybe the next slide that Adam is going to show here should allow me to get into a little bit more detail and what we had to cut on site at the U.S. Amateur in particular, or excuse me, it'll be after the following slide here on volunteers. So Adam, I'll turn this one back to you.
Yeah, great insights, Ben. And this fit exactly into that category. This was our biggest opportunity to mitigate a lot of our risks, just the sheer number of volunteers that we rely on year to year. And to your point earlier, what's essential, what's non-essential, and then what can be replaced by staff. Staff from Golf Canada or USGA, or even staff from the host club, I think were probably used in a number of cases. So, it'll depend on the event. You can run golf just like a day-to-day member experience, or you can look at the essential volunteers. Officials would probably be your starting and scoring officials, spotters, player services potentially remotely, as you alluded to, Ben. Scoring, I think this day and age, with a reduced limited number, scoring would probably still be an important factor. So friends and family and spectators that aren't able to attend the event would still want to see what's going on with your event. But, in terms of non-essential, transportation, depending on the accommodations and the nature of the event, media and communication is another one remotely that you can look at. Marshals, depending on how many people are on site, probably don't need as many or if any marshals. And then in terms of what staff roles can do, golf shop, range facilities was probably one where a lot of you had it as a staff function. So I think from our standpoint, without running any championships, the biggest focus for us is keeping our volunteers engaged. We're a volunteer run organization with our board, our operating committees, our standing committees. So we're just trying to keep them engaged. We ran the hospitality suite is always pretty popular at events. So we actually did a virtual hospitality suite where we're hoping to do a bit more over the winter and just keep them involved and engaged and kind of close to our operations.
Virtual hospitality suite. I'll have to learn a little bit more about that one. That's awesome. Here's the slide that I was referencing. just a few moments ago. You can see clearly at the top, this is of June 4th, 2020. This isn't where the U.S. Amateur landed in the end. But Adam and I thought that this would be an important slide to share, where a normal U.S. Amateur is to what the reality ended up being. And I guess first and foremost, just to clean up a couple of things here, we normally have 312 players. We teed off 264. That was our field size this year. We allowed every player to bring 2 player guests, but that had to include a caddy. A caddy wasn't on top of that, so it was a player plus 2, and one of them had to be a caddy if the player was taking a caddy. Again, we were trying to minimize our total numbers. So you can see where we went from 1,200 parents/guardians down to what was less than 312 because of the reduced field size. Player guests wasn't necessarily 0. It was probably 264, as I mentioned, with the 2 player guests total. Caddies was significantly less there as well in the 2020 column. USGA staff and officials, we reduced our staff size tremendously, almost in half, as well as our rules committee on site from what is generally around 50, 60 individuals down to 24. With a change in broadcast partner from Fox to NBC, our numbers were reduced to begin with, but I will tell you that number overall was less than 100, not 150. We didn't have college coaches on site unless they were one of the players' guests. Believe it or not, we do have agents and player managers that show up at the U.S. Amateur. None of them were allowed on site. All of our future host site representatives from Oakmont to Ridgewood, Marion, Hazeltine, none of those folks were allowed to attend the championship this year. We still have some golf manufacturers that came. That number ended up being only 2. And as you see there, with a normal U.S. Amateur, we'd have a little over 600 volunteers. We made the decision very late that we were only going to use Bandon Dunes host club staff who were tested and inside our bubble to serve as volunteers. And as Adam alluded to, we took it down to bare bones. We didn't have any 4 caddies. We just had volunteers that were serving in key roles around the clubhouse and some that helped with scoring, but in essence, no true volunteers. These were all paid Bandon Dunes Golf Resort employees that worked the U.S. Amateur Championship this year. And I will tell you also at this year's U.S. Open, the vast majority of volunteers that you saw spotting golf balls in that high rough were full-time USGA employees. Obviously, the USGA home office is about 45 minutes to an hour away from where Wingfoot is. And we decided to utilize our own staff for a variety of reasons. Very golf savvy, but a lot of our employees can be used in a variety of different areas through over the course of the championship. So a lot of our other championship directors that manage amateur championships were spotting golf balls. But at the same time, if we needed to pull them to work in a rules capacity, if we needed to pull them to serve as a standard bearer, our chief people officer, our chief finance officer, all were live scoring volunteers. We just tried to utilize our staff solely at Wingfoot to cover things. Now, we did have some Wingfoot members that also helped fill in the gaps on the final 2 days, but all in all, our volunteer numbers, we were able to keep it, below 50 even at the U.S. Open, which was pretty impressive. So this slide in the end just kind of shows you, that's a long way to get to the totals. What's a normal week at a little over 40,000? We had less than 1,000 at Bandon Dunes when you really look at the numbers. And again, we did that intentionally because the plan that we put forth to the state of Oregon was a phase 1 plan. We didn't want Oregon to move to a phase 3 and start opening things back up, and then all of a sudden cases start to uptick, and then we were going to be required to cut our rules committee and cut out volunteers and do everything at the last minute. And in the end, that served us very well, that we were always operating in the phase 1, and if anybody questioned our method, we could relay that we were operating in phase 1. So a drastic difference Is this how we see it in the future? Let's hope not. We want a lot of these numbers to come back. But the thing is, we made some tough decisions. We did it. We reimagined a lot of areas, and, you know, hindsight being 2020 again, silver lining is, okay, some of these things worked in our favor. What can we hold on to? What could we keep? Rules committee size is one. You know, working with the media on reducing their numbers, as I mentioned earlier, is another. So I think, you know, continuing to be thoughtful about every aspect of how we plan for the championships will serve us all very well in the future.
That was really interesting, Ben. It goes to show what you can do to run an event, and I know for a fact those are probably the most qualified spotters we'll ever hear about in golf. And you know, when the spotlight was on, you guys did whatever it took to run the U.S. Open.
For any of you that know Greg Sanfilippo on our staff, who manages our junior amateur and senior amateur, we still give him a hard time today. The one golf ball we lost at Wingfoot was Harris English's on the first hole, and that's where Greg was, and we haven't let him down for it yet.
No, he definitely won't be able to live it down.
Exactly.
From a digital perspective, you know, when I started with Golf Canada over 12 years ago, we used to mail out entry forms and take registration by the hard copy. You have to mail it in. And we've come a long way over the last 5 years. We've tried to make more strides to be environmentally friendly and reduce kind of the paper and even waste at our championship. So I think this was collectively a great moment for golf, just to go pretty much entirely digital in our communications. There's systems out there that will check in players on site without having any common touch points. You know, entry form, fact sheets, the local rules, the evacuation plan, alerts, communication. I think everything can be done digitally. You know, again, the only pushback, again, coming back to the players, there's some demographics that, you know, like the hard copy and they need that whole location sheet. But I think all in all, that's probably one of the biggest silver linings in golf this year, just with having your scorecard digitally. You know, we were on the way to creating an app for Golf Canada for all of our members to post scores and track stats. You can see here on the screen, that's our new GPS feature that our players are going to be able to use at our championships. And you know, I'm happy to announce, I know they're a sponsor of the conference, but we've gone ahead and partnered with Golf Genius for the next 3 years, Golf Canada and the Provincial Association. So I know their scorecard features and their communication is next level, and it couldn't be better timing. So in terms of digital communication to players, you know, I look at the industry, and, you know, I have a screen up here. This was Mike Weir's 50th birthday with all of his close friends. I think COVID has taught us that, you know, video conferencing and calls aren't that bad. And I think the reluctancy of society before is kind of, you know, everyone's guard's been taken down. You've got hats, you've got t-shirts on this call. It was posted on YouTube. So, you know, being able to be connected with your host clubs, with your volunteers, we've tried to take technology a bit further, and we thought it was revolutionary a couple of years ago to put a phone number on a scorecard in case you had a ruling. Well, we had a championship in Prince Edward Island this year, and we actually were FaceTiming with some of the players to help out remotely. So, you know, we're trying to look at different ways, even with the RBC Canadian Open, as we're looking at future sites. We've used drones, we've sent feedback, we've had video calls with the PGA Tour and some of the referees just to get their feedback. And traditionally, what would be a site visit a couple days, we've actually been able to do it through video and calls and be able to go that way. So I think we're all feeling the same way, that it's just, you know, changed the way we run championship, and we're just more efficient, more effective.
I think that's great, Adam. I don't think we have a choice, right? And we have to embrace what has happened this year and how we've been able to adapt to it, and the technology that's afforded to us now, you know, with travel restrictions and everything that exists, you know, whether it's from state to state or country to country. I think everybody is going to have to use that, you know, video call method in order to continue moving forward. So the technology that's out there, I certainly know we had a lot of whole location sheets left in starters boxes this year, given we sent whole location sheets out via email or text the night before to players. And that's something that never thought the USGA would do, but we did it. And now we're going to be able to save a tremendous amount of waste of paper and things like that moving forward. So again, the silver lining of all this is it's time to move forward. It's time to kind of shed the old ways of doing things and move into the more modern era. As we look at a few things inside the ropes, and we'll make sure we, we're running a little long here on time, but as you can imagine, there's a variety of things inside the ropes that we had to look at differently this year, because mainly we didn't have fans. Starting and scoring areas, the USGA is certainly not taking any credit for kind of some of that design. We spent a lot of time with our friends at the PGA Tour, LPGA Tour, European Tour, and even all of you at the AGA level trying to figure out the best possible way to, can have set up and maintain safe and efficient starting and scoring areas. And this is something that I think will evolve over the next couple months and may look even a little bit different heading into 2021. But when you start to factor in, having, essential PPE and other things in these areas, it can get a little bit tricky. But it seems like everybody was able to kind of manage this throughout the season as the state and local or county officials helped regulate. But as we move forward into a digital era, scoreboards and status boards, we didn't have spectators this year, so there was no need to really necessarily have scoreboards or status boards up. I think moving forward, at least at our USGA Amateur Championships, you're going to see a lot less of that. Let's face it, your scoreboard status board's in the palm of your hand. And the expense that comes with building some of these things to make the championship look better isn't necessarily needed as much anymore because it's in the palm of your hands. So if we have the ability to take those dollars and reallocate them, back to the players or to the championship or to the host club in a more meaningful way moving forward, that's what our intent is going to be, because the digital era is here to stay. And for the vast majority of the demographics that we're dealing with, they rely on it. So yes, we had to call a few audibles inside the ropes to make sure that people maintain proper social distancing. But in all, those of you on the phone contributed a lot to how this looked and felt and acted out in the field. And I know this is one item that Adam and I are just curious to maybe some other creative ideas that folks had this year in regards to other things inside the ropes that may benefit us in the long haul.
Great insight, Ben. We promised we're wrapping up. This is kind of our last slide as we lead into it. And, I don't think we need to spend too much time on it. I think everyone's probably well educated on how our governing bodies, the USGA and R&A, pivoted and adapted the rules of golf so that committees and organizations and clubs could adapt to the safety protocols to remove those common touch points, to make sure it was a digital experience, to make sure that we were, playing golf still, maintaining a championship where you actually physically had to hold the ball out. I think, there's lots of companies that probably capitalized that and came up with a couple innovative inventions to keep it going. But I think it just goes to show, how everyone pivoted and how we were still able to run a golf championship and play day-to-day golf across the countries and across the world. So, I think probably scoring methods, like Ben said, did people go to digital scorecards? Did you print scorecards still? And maybe penalties for flag stick. I think that was a common question in Canada, just about what happens when someone does touch the flag stick, what's the penalty? So, I don't think I'll turn it over to you, Ben, if you want to say anything more on this slide, but I think we're pretty much getting near the end of it.
Yeah, the only remark I'll make in the spirit of moving this thing forward, Adam, here is the flexibility, that is out there now in order to continue to play this game. And certainly for our USGA qualifying, in the year ahead, still relying on those modified rules to allow, AGAs and folks that run qualifying for us to conduct them in, their states or clubs that still kind of mandate that these rules be in place. At the end of the day, the players that are playing on that day are all playing by the same rules, whether the flag stick remains in or there's a pool noodle in the hole or rakes are not being used, whatever it may be, they're all still playing by the same rules. And we're comfortable with that. I think that shows, you know, how different the USGA is in terms of thinking than even 15 years ago when I first started on staff. So more to come on this. There's a lot of great minds within our building, and certainly that includes several of you that are on the phone that contribute to, you know, the rules making process along the way. We'll just have to stay tuned to how it plays out.
And then this is where Ben and I will look into our crystal balls and predict the future, which is going to be difficult. So I think, you know, from my side, I think we're just ready for anything. We're ready to go forward. We're ready to go backwards. You know, we're hoping the border opens. You know, we're looking into testing. The Calgary airport has piloted, you know, rapid testing in Canada. So really, we're just preparing for everything, planning contingency plans upon contingency plans, and budgeting for anything that's going to happen. So, you know, that was both of our first experience at an IAGA conference, and going this much over. Who knows if we'll get invited back? We'll have to see. But happy to lead into we'll give you a short break. 4 o'clock is the breakout. We've got a couple questions that have come in. I'm just going to jot them down, and I think we'll kick them off for the breakout session, just so that everyone can have a quick little break before we get into that.
Thanks, Adam. Again, you know, great to be with everyone. I'm hopeful that on the USGA behalf in 2021, we conduct all of our championships. The one last thing that I keep reminding myself that I'll share with the group is the rabbit hole, and not chasing things down the rabbit hole. It seems like right now we have to live only 2 weeks at a time because there's so many curveballs that are being thrown at us. Focus on things that are in the moment. That's certainly what we're going to do in 2021, and be flexible and listen to your stakeholders as they drive so much of what we do. But, you know, it's funny, as we were putting together this presentation, the crystal ball, right? I'd be a billionaire if I had one and can determine what lies ahead, but look forward to working with everybody that's on this phone and on behalf of the industry to keep moving golf forward. So again, thanks for your time.